Well, good evening, everyone. We're going to ask the question, was Luke an eyewitness? He is the author of Acts. He claims to be the author of Acts. He claims to be the author of Luke, the Gospel. So Acts is effectively Luke Part 2, the sequel. And I want to ask this question, was Luke an eyewitness? And I want to give some evidence to support the view that he is, and that his gospel and the book of Acts is not written hundreds and hundreds of years after the event. Now, let's make sure that all this works. So if we begin at the beginning of Luke's gospel, he says, many have undertaken, I'm using the NIV UK text here, have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. And then these are not just any eyewitnesses. He says, many have undertaken to draw up account, but those who were the first eyewitnesses of the word, he actually says, I was aware from the beginning. Literally, it seems good also to me, having been acquainted from the first with all things. Now, Luke had an apologetic agenda. He says, with this in mind, I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. Now, I don't know whether Peter's told you this. We don't really know who Theophilus is. His name means friend of God. And so we could say that if you count yourself a friend of God, he's writing for you. But it may be that Theophilus was the guy who effectively sponsored the work that he did to write these documents. There's no printing press in those days. All of this stuff has to be handwritten. And one of the things that is important to realise, just to show you how careful these documents are cared for, until 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, there were opponents of the Christian faith who wanted to say, you Christians back-edited the book of Isaiah to make it look like a prophecy. I'm talking about the very specific stuff that's there about the suffering servant. And we had no way of proving otherwise, because the earliest of the Hebrew manuscripts we had dated from about 700 AD. But then when they found the Great Isaiah Scroll in 1947, and of course that's now been subject to a great deal of work, you find that all the suffering servant texts are there, and that predates the birth of Jesus. And the differences, I'm told, between the text and the other one that's 1,000 years younger are minuscule, which gives you assurance of how carefully these texts are guarded. That's really not to do with the subject, but it occurs to me it's an important point to make. But he says to Theophilus, I'm writing this so that you might know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Let me use an illustration. You go to the back of Acts and you find that Paul is giving his defense between Festus to Festus and Agrippa and Bernice. And he starts off saying, I'm very pleased to be able to give my defense, my apologia, if you like, to you. And he begins by explaining, giving his defense. And then Festus calls out and he says, you're mad, Paul. And he says very graciously, I am not mad, oh, Theophilus. Festus, he said, and the king knows that, because I don't believe any of this is done as a corner. And then he actually challenges the king. And the king says, almost, you think you can persuade me already to be a Christian? In other words, he's feeling confronted. And Alistair McGrath makes the point that real evangelism involves apologetics plus confrontation equals evangelism. Let me ask you, what's the verdict? He'd appealed to Caesar, and Festus has got him to go before Agrippa because he wants to know what to write to Caesar. And at the end, their verdict is, This man hasn't done anything deserving of death. If he hadn't appealed to Caesar, he could have been set free. In other words, he's not guilty. You see, this is what Theophilus needs to know, that what he's been taught is true. And so Paul's behavior is not breaking Roman law, is not breaking Hebrew law. Do you see the point? So we always have to ask ourselves, when we're looking at Acts, what does this actually do to serve that agenda? Now, I'm not suggesting that he's not interested in history. I'm not interested. He's also very much got an Old Testament fulfillment agenda. And yes, he's got an evangelistic agenda, but in particular, he has an apologetic agenda as well. So I'm coming from the perspective that Luke has authored Acts, and he says in my former book, in my former Logos, I wrote to you about all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day he was taken up to heaven. So Acts, we're saying, is Luke part 2, the sequel. Now, I'm not going to start at the beginning. I've got an hour. I've used some time already. I want to begin to look at some of the places I've been to and get you to look into them. Now, Antioch is about, at the time, it was in Syria. These days, the modern city of Antakya is in Turkey, and the boundary is really up here. But can you see there's a row of mountains here? If you want to get out of this river valley and you want to go to Tarsus, you have to climb, you have to go over the Syrian, over the, come here. You've got to go over the Syrian gates. What's going on? Have I got? Oh, that's right. See what I'm doing. Right. The other thing is, if you want to go by sea, you have to go to Seleucia. Seleucia is the port that belongs to Antioch, and it's about a day's walk. And you've got mountains either side. So the river valley is the one that is right up here. Okay. That little mark there is Harte Airport. It wasn't there when Paul was there, obviously. Now, the gospel, we will read this, that you will have, I don't know whether you've covered this yet, you're probably a bit earlier, but we read in the NIV, now those who had been scattered by the persecution that broke out when Stephen was killed, travelled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word only among Jews. Some of them, however, men from Cyprus and Cyrene, went to Antioch and began to speak to Greeks also. And that means he's drawing a distinction between Greeks and Jews. So they are implicitly Gentile Greeks. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to ask the question, why Greeks? What's the significance of that to the history of the situation? But that's a separate subject. Anyway, he was telling them the good news of the Lord Jesus, and the Lord's hand was on them, and a great number went there. Now, what we then find is that Barnabas is sent to Antioch to sort this out. What's going on? Because this is new stuff. Gentiles being converted. So now this has happened in Acts chapter 10 before, and the reason so much text is devoted to that, because it also gets rehearsed again in chapter 11, is because this is establishing a precedent that for the Jewish guys, well, I didn't expect that, right? So this news of this reached the church of Jerusalem, what's going on in Antioch. And they sent Barnabas to Antioch. And when he arrived and saw the grace of God had done, he was glad and encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. I want you to notice what's said about him. Barnabas is his nickname. His real name is Joseph. His nickname means son of encouragement. He is a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. Now, this is what happens when you go to a place. The modern motorway, which is here, climbs out of this river valley, and it winds itself up to the Syrian gates, which are 600 meters above sea level. What's the height of the largest, what's Pennygent or something like that in the Yorkshire Dales, is it? That it's quite high. And I have never been on a motorway. This is a motorway. This is the same quality of road as the A1M that comes down through South Yorkshire, right? Notice what it does. I got to, we were in a bus and we got, sorry, did it again, pressed the wrong button. We got to here and suddenly I'm seeing this motorway doing a 180-degree turn. I've never known anything like it. And it suddenly came to me, because I didn't know that to get out you had to climb that height. And what we're told is Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. You see, Luke's not giving you a big deal here. He is actually, because to get there is 4.5 hours on a motorway in a coach. And if you walked it, you're talking about getting on for 2 weeks. And to get there, even begin, you've got to climb the Belen Pass unless you go by sea. And I'm thinking, this thought just come. I'm just going up the hill. No wonder Barnabas is called the son of encouragement. No wonder he is said to be a good man, because he sees what's going on. Antioch is at the joint of many trade routes. It is strategic. God knows that. Paul learns that. And what does he do? Barnabas is saying, we've got to get something established here. And he walks that distance. Do you understand what I'm saying? And now, if I was super intelligent, I could have gone to the map. I could have pored over the map, noticed the contours and worked it out. It never occurred to me that you had to walk, because the map comes flat, doesn't it, when you see it? And when you're there, suddenly you begin to realize things. Now, look, I'm going to be talking about a guy called Mark Wilson. If you see the interview, read the interview, I'll try and send a copy of it to Peter to give you. It's the Biblical Archaeology Daily, I think. It's an article, and he's being interviewed in the Scholars' Chair. And he says the problem with so many pastors, now this is not knocking them, but what he's saying is this: all the stuff you study is text-based. Now, I know we believe more than the Bible just being a text book. But he said people never go. And because they never go, there are things that you realise, like happens to me, which would never have occurred to me had I not gone. Do you understand? But I realise it's got a price tag. But it doesn't have to be ultra expensive to do these things. You can get around Turkey using their bus system, which is very reliable. And because it's privately owned and competitive, it's quite cost effective. So, you know, you could do this. Okay. Now, looking at it the other way, the first journey, because this is really earlier that Barnabas goes there. But when it comes to the second journey, they go overland. So they use that route. But look at how this works out here. The first journey. Now, at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. And while they were worshipping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I've called them." And after that, fasted and prayed, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. Now, the text then says the two of them, sent on their way by the Holy Spirit, went down to Seleucia and sailed on from there to Cyprus. Now, why it's called Seleucia, you'll find out in the morning. But Seleucia, this is Lancelot. I got Lancelot to just do this earlier. This is Google Map. This is Google Earth. You can go just on Google Maps and go on to Street View, and you can actually see there are the two jetties from the ancient port, right? They're still there. And Seleucia was the port of ancient Antioch. Do you understand? This is a real place. Okay. Now, here's what it looks like. The beach isn't particularly nice. This end of the Mediterranean is a bit grotty. But here are the remains of the jetties. Now, the modern port is called Seleucia Piera, and it's the port of modern Antakya. And you'll see that if you go on Google Maps. So more and more, Google Street View enables you to go to these places. I'm going to show you some other places that you can go on Google Street View, and you can check it out for yourself from Mattersey without getting on an aeroplane and going there for yourself. Okay, so in other words, people say, well, Luke's exaggerating. No, if you go to where Luke is talking about, it's just like he says it's there. And that in itself is evidence to contradict people that say it's not historical. One of the things that's important about eyewitnesses, do they describe the geography as it is? Now, we jump a bit. What happens in Acts 15 is, because the Gentiles are getting saved, they have the Council of Jerusalem and they deliberate and discuss this, and eventually they write a letter. I've not gone into the whole letter, but it occurs in Acts 15. And one of the purposes of this is the apostles and elders, your brothers, to the Gentile believers in Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia. Did I say that? There's no C in the Greek alphabet. There's only a K sound, a K sound. Now, when I learned how to read, I said A, B, K, D, E. You know, so it's K. It's a K sound, okay? It's not a C sound. And so they're writing to that. Now I'm going to pick up on that in a minute. You can see where Cilicia is. It's the area that you have to go across the Syrian gates to be able to get to it. And this is what they do. Now, because of the argument that takes place, which I'm not going to deal with tonight, Paul chooses Silas, who's another Roman citizen, incidentally, and they left, and commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord, he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Where have you heard that a church was established in Cilicia? Surely, according to the book of Acts, the first church that's established is at Antioch, outside Jerusalem. But the implication of this is that before Barnabas fetched Paul from Tarsus, he already was planting churches, right? Now, I'm not proving it. We can ask him one day. But do you see the point? That this area here is Cilicia, around Tarsus, and there would be churches around here in what was then Syria. So to get there, you have to, if you're going there by road, you have to go through the what's today called the Belen Pass. It's a motorway. It's pretty high up, and it's quite well populated up there. But to get to Tarsus, the modern motorways go all the way there. And when you get to Tarsus, there's an archaeological museum, and there's sections of Roman road that they've uncovered and stuff like that. But it's not like some of the other places that I'm going to show you. Now, so that's what goes on. Now, going back there, do you see up there, I've written the Cilician gates, and there's a mountain range there that's pretty high. So if you're going to go back to Derby and Lystra, which is what they're going to do, because they're going to strengthen the churches that were founded in the first mission, of the mission journeys, they've got to go through the Cilician gates. And this is the modern motorway that goes through the Cilician gates. These two big cliffs are the gates. They're 1,000 meters above sea level. These guys walked this. Right? The old Roman road, if you look down the other side, you can see traces of it going through. Oh, and there's a railway as well, but I don't think that was there when they went. But this is what they had to do. Now, we were in a coach, and eventually, when you get to the plain of Anatolia, it's the old name for the area of Turkey. Have you ever seen these sorts of signs with brown with white? You see them here, don't you? Well, they have them in Turkey as well. And this tell is at Derby. Now, let me show you what I mean by a tell. I took the following photograph from the top of it, looking to the west. I didn't ask the cloud to turn up. It reminds me of Elijah, right? Do you notice how flat the land is? Now, that's looking west, but it's like that all the way round. So when an archaeologist sees a mound, he knows that's man-made. that's where you need to dig. And they've started to dig, and you go up there and you can already see shards of pottery lying around. I'm sure that if we had spent time there, we probably would have found coins and all sorts of things. Turkey, you do not even take a stone out of Turkey, you will get arrested. You go to Antalya airport, your luggage, and you go through security just to get into the terminal building. You then go through, airside, and you go through security again. And then when you are actually going to board your plane, they may even do another security check on you to make sure it's everything. So don't get the idea that Turkey just, anything goes. No, it doesn't. They're actually, you do feel quite safe there as a tourist. But of course, this is pretty well off the tourist track. Now, then we find it says that Paul came to Lystra. It actually says Derby and Lystra. I've just focused it for the sake of this to be in sequence, where a disciple named Timothy lived. Now, he'd already established a church at Lystra and at Derby, or you said something else, Derby, whatever. And his mother was Jewish and a believer, and whose father was a Greek, implying a Gentile. And the believers at Lystra and Iconium, now Iconium is modern Konya, I'll come back to that, spoke well of him. And Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in the area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. So Lystra is another tell. And if you put ancient Lystra into Google Maps, it will find this. And just like if you put ancient Derby, it will find it for you. The only problem is Google Street View hasn't been as close to it as I have. So the nearest road that appears blue, you plonk your mouse down there and you look in the right direction, and you can see this little hump in the distance because it's not close up. But yes, it's another tell. So at the moment, these places have not been heavily excavated like some of the other sites further west in Turkey. This year, for the first time, the Turkish authorities have given permission to a Turkish professor to start excavating Colossi, which is another big tell. It's very close to Laodicea, which has been excavated for some years. Now, of course, what Paul is doing, he clearly is, let's go and strengthen the churches that we've already planted. And they are bringing the letter as well, so that this is sorted out. Now, it may be that the only one of the New Testament books that exists at this time, and of course it doesn't exist in large copy form, is Galatians. The reason I allege that, I wouldn't argue about it, this is my theory, and it's not my theory, I picked it up from other people. It's dealing really with the same problem in a way. Some Judaizers or the like are saying it's not sufficient to believe in justification by faith alone. You need to be circumcised, you need to obey the law. And it has no mention whatsoever of the Council of Jerusalem. So you could take the view, therefore, that it's written before the Council of Jerusalem. And in which case it must be the first, because the second is 1 Thessalonians, and that's pretty early. That's written to a church that is between 8 months and a year old. And it has remarkable growth in that period, but there we are. So they set out to go to there, and I'm not going to go to Iconium. The reason is that while there is a very big archaeological museum there, the centre of the city is very much built over where the archaeology would be. And so it hasn't been excavated as much as, say, Antioch towards Pisidia up there, which is where I'm going to go next. When you go there, there is the remains of what's called St. Paul's Church. Now, Paul had never been there, of course, but the the view locally is, and whether it's true or not, I don't know, that this is built on the site of the synagogue where he preached in Acts 13. We, we don't know that for sure. But it's still pretty remarkable. That's my wife standing in the middle there. And there's even an aqueduct that used to bring the water from the mountains. I just put my camera on timer and hoped that this would come out. But the first time we went there, we just went there by camel coach on the bus and explored it. And if I got time, I'll tell you about that after we've finished this, because it's quite a journey in itself. But in the village, the city of Yalvac, which is where the ancient city of Antioquia is, there is this museum. And this artifact, Professor Ben Witherington and Mark Wilson found this stone in the pile of stones around the museum and said to the curator, you need to get this inside and look after it. Because who is Sergius Paulus? Well, he's very likely to be this guy, likely to be the Sergius Paulus, who was the proconsul that Paul and Barnabas met at Paphos. If you go to Paphos, there is a World Heritage Roman site there, which is pretty well for sure where Paul met him. And this inscription is believed to be the family come from this area. Now, you see, why did Paul and Barnabas go to Paphos and then they suddenly get the ship all the way north, and they don't stop at Perga for very long, they go straight to Pisidian Antioch? And this may be the reason why Sergius Paulus has become a Christian, say, you need to go and talk to my family. It may be that's what's going on. But we don't know for sure. Now, the thing that's difficult is that according to the information on this, it was found many years ago by another archaeologist. But I know Ben Witherington and I know Mark Wilson, and I know the story of how they found this in the pile of artifacts that are lying around the museum. And so they persuaded them, and they've now created a room in the museum just to the ministry of Paul, which isn't bad for a Muslim city, really. Now, the first time I went to Perga, we wanted a late holiday one November, and it would never happen again. I was telling Peter, we got this room in a 5-star hotel for £32 a night, including breakfast, not each, that's just the two of us. And it turned out that the hotel was being run down and the franchise was changing, and they then had to refurbish the machine. So they're just trying to fill up the rooms. And we got a cheap flight from Gatwick, and we had the rough guide. And the rough guide said, there's a Christian coffee bar in the old town, and you need to go find it because they've got books and you can drink coffee and read all day long. So we knocked on the door and it was closed because they were having the roof done. And they said, on Sunday, the meeting will be in this cafe locally down the road. So we go there, and this Welsh guy leading worship, right, who turns out to be an Elim missionary. And I thought, I didn't know you were here. And we got to know them. And this mission was started by some American evangelical Presbyterians. And they're doing a great work. And Professor Mark Wilson is associated with the work there. He lives there with his wife. But anyway, we just went on the local bus to a village and walked to this place on this day. It was a beautiful day. And the reason I put this picture is, can you see the mountains in the distance? And they just said to me, you need to come here. Well, that's how I felt. I wanted to go back. But I had a heart operation before that happened. And there's my wife in the picture. This is part of the marketplace. It's not the best picture of Perga. You could spend a lot of time walking around Perga, just seeing all the different things. Now, here's Mark Wilson. We're in Perga in now 2022, and he's leaning on an inscription, which is Latin. The guy standing here is the licensed Turkish guide, which Mark has probably trained. And the inscription that is there, I tried to find the reference for it before I came. And do you know these things? Do you ever sometimes put stuff on your computer and then forget where you've put it? And I will find it for you. But this inscription is showing that at the time of the reign of Claudius, which of course is when Paul and Barnabas were here, Perga, or rather the Roman province of Galatia, actually stretched right down into Pamphylia, where Perga is. And there's more and more stuff being unearthed all the time. The next text, I got Mark to pose this. Why am I doing that? He's pointing the route of the Via Sebast and the original route to Antioch toward Pisidia went from this crossroads along out that way. There are two possible routes that Paul could take. The first route is the direct route, and that's more strenuous. Mark has done a study by looking at Google Earth, and if you look at Google Earth, you can do a 3D thing, and he's worked out that it's quite likely that he took the Via Sebast route because it's less strenuous, and they may have come back the direct way. We don't know. But here's something. This is what the Via Sebast looks like when you cross the Taurus Mountains. That's my wife is the one up in, this is the second one back there. I heard about this, I wanted to go find it, and Mark put me in touch with somebody who's probably the only tour leader in Antakya that knows where this is, and only because Mark's shown him. But look what Luke says. He just says, from Perga, they went to Pisidian Antioch. Luke is not writing a travel document. He only is writing stuff that is giving evidence that what he's taught, what he's been taught is true. Sorry, I've suddenly forgotten. Theophilus, that's right. But the thing that impressed me when I did this journey the first time by bus even, is Luke, this is the biggest understatement I've ever heard of in my life. Can you actually see even the boundary stones on the road is still there? This road is more than 2,000 years old. And you think of the state of potholes we have, right? Now, this is over the pass, the top of the pass, there is this milestone. It's weathered, and if you looked even carefully here, you can see that it says in Roman numerals CXXX1X, 139 miles towards Antioch. It talks about Antiochia, that sort of thing. And you can see it there, but it's very, very weathered. And this is at the top of the pass. The road comes up from the plain, and we always told Roman roads are straight. No, this one winds like this. And you get to the top, imagine this is Turkey. It's a hot day, 40 degrees, right? Now, it wasn't when we were there. Fortunately for us, it was overcast the day we were there. And it started to rain when we were on the way down. But if you've had to climb, what's the first thing you want on a hot day? Water. And when you get there, there's a stone building with a cistern. And when it fills, it overflows into the next one. So what happens to the sediment? It drops. And then it goes to a third one, and there's a roof over it, and you can actually walk in and you can get a drink of water. Now, I'm not advocating that you should do it today, but what I'm saying is all this stuff is there still. And this is not even fenced off. And as you walk down, we look up on the mountains either side, we see wild ibex looking down at us. You know, you have to be careful when you're going out in the wilds in Turkey because there's snakes and stuff, but I've never seen one. But I saw one crawling over a wall when I went to Pompeii once, and I didn't go anywhere near it that way. But here we are. Now, once you've done the Taurus Mountains, you get to Lake Egadir. Now, this is like an inland sea. Can you see the mountains in the distance? That it goes all the way out there. It's huge. And there is a trekking trail that an English lady called Kate Clow has originated from Perga. You can walk the whole distance. You could camp out if you're young. You know, some of you younger guys would love this, I'm sure. And you just have to have your tent. You have to have food with you. You can camp out wild and so on. And it's been waymarked. And it'll take you about 2 to 3 weeks to do. But if you have an event, if you want to go on an adventure, I wish I was younger. I'd love to do it. But this is what you have to negotiate. And on the walk, you have to get a fisherman to take you across to the other side. And when you arrive at Pisidian Antioch, this towers above the surrounding town of Yalvach. You can't see most of the remains, it's just around. But can you see how it's surrounded by mountains? This is a November picture. Now, I'm not going to go into more detail, but what I'm trying to say to you is you go on this journey and it's things like, crumbs, Luke, that's real understatement. But you go there and you get a feel. What impressed me was not so much Pisidian Antioch, but the journey. And I thought, these guys did it because people like me needed to hear the gospel. And it just causes you to feel a worm. Do you understand what I'm saying? And they eventually, we're told that they came to the border of Mysia and they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus wouldn't allow them to. How did they know that? My theory is when Jesus departed, one of the farewell narratives is he talks about himself being, I am the true vine, and if you abide in me, then you will bring much, much fruit. And I think that what you can see in the way in which Paul and Barnabas and Paul and Silas respond is these are men that abided in the vine, if I might say that. And as a result, God directed them, because there's no New Testament for the turn to them on an Alpha course or whatever, or Christianity Explored course. And in Thessalonians, Paul reveals that the way in which he nurtured churches was to model it and then get them to imitate him. He says the same thing in Philippians, and he does that. And if you are with people like that, you are going to grow. Now, we mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that miracles are happening thick and fast every 5 minutes. But you're going to grow if you have that, because what they did is they formed the attitudes of faith, love, and hope. Now, love is not romantic love. This is agape. This is selfless love. And what drives them is their hope. You see, too many Christians think, now this is an illustration which I'm trying to think of the guy. I think it's David Wenham. I'm not absolutely sure. Might not be David Wenham. No, it was one of the guys who was at LST. And he wrote the Bible Speaks Today commentary on Jesus' second coming. And he uses this illustration. He says, many people think that the second coming and knowing about it is like putting a roof rack on the car. You only need it now and again. You go down to the wood yard to buy some wood and it's too big to go in the car, so you put it on a roof rack. And you're going on holiday and you put it on, and he says, no, the second coming is the engine in the car. You see, if you're told by Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:10 that we will all have to stand through the judgment seat of Christ, which is eschatological, if we do, we need a saviour. But we don't need a saviour if we haven't got to stand before God. And so Paul, you look at the way he deals with Felix. He debates with him in Acts 24 about righteousness and judgment to come, and Felix is scared. Paul has this eschatological dimension even when he's preaching the gospel. And folks, we need to realise that we need to get into that. No, I'm talking about whether or not there's a rapture. I'm talking about the fact that now is not all there is. But anyway, they ended up in Troas. I think the reason they go to Troas, they seem not to have firm plans once they finished with Antioch towards Pisidia. They wanted to go to Asia Minor. Now, it's not that God's not interested in them, those places, because he certainly is. Because if you read 1 Peter, it's written to people that are in Bithynia by that time. But something that challenges you about this. What does Paul say at the end of Ephesians 3? This is a principle. There's a doxology there. He said, God is what? Abundantly able to do more than anything. You see, God's vision is always bigger than ours. And God knew that he wanted to do something far more. This for us would be challenge enough. But God was interested. So they go there, and of course Paul has another session with the Lord, and he gets told, come over to Macedonia and help us. And they get on the ship, and we're introduced to the we passages, which means that Luke's with him. Now, the we passages are a difficult thing on their own because most of them concern sea journeys. They don't all, as we will soon see, but what does this actually mean? I'm just presenting it to you face value. I think he means at the moment, I was with Paul and Silas and Timothy when they went there. And they go through Samothrace, and that's doable, folks, on ferries these days. And goes to Neapolis. Now, Neapolis is the port of Philippi. It's about 10 miles away from Philippi, a bit like Seleucia is from Antioch. And the Roman road that comes up, there's the modern port of Cavallar down there, which is ancient Neapolis. And this road comes up the hill behind it. This is the Roman road, the Via Egnatia, that comes all the way from what is today the modern Turkish city of Istanbul, and it goes all the way across to the west coast of northern Greece till you get to the sea. And here is this Roman road, and it's still there. Only we are walking down it. Paul and Silas and Timothy be walking up it. So behind there's high land, and you come up to the top of the high land, and you look over the top, and in the distance, can you see that rather pointed mountain? Right in front of that, below that, is where the ancient place of Philippi is. So it's about 10 miles from the harbour. And this bit at the top here is where the modern road called Egnatia is. This is a motorway that goes all the way from Istanbul right the way across, but it's still called the same thing. It's just a rather smarter road than would have been when they were there. And when you get down to the archaeological site, this is the old marketplace. It's called the Agora. And here you've got the Via Egnatia, the Roman road, coming right past it. Can you see that group of people there? I was supposed to be with them, but I was so fascinated because we had a guide who wasn't a Christian, and I thought it can't be possibly worth listening to what she has to say. Well, what are they all gathered around there for? And I got this lovely photograph, and then I went back and I found that I'd missed something quite profound because, well, before I get there, let's do this. Luke the eyewitness at Philippi. From there, that is Neapolis, now notice the we passage here isn't over the sea. We travelled to Philippi, a Roman colony and leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there for several days. And on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. Why the river? Well, there's no synagogue, so you will expect to find Jews by the river. How many of you are old enough to remember a song that got into the top 10 called By the Rivers of Babylon, where we sat down? Why? Because Jews, you see, in a synagogue, there is an immersion baptistry called a mikveh, and a Jewish lady needs to be baptized every month. I'll leave you ladies to identify why, because I don't want to be indelicate on a video. And so that's where you would find them to go. And what happens, it says one day, we were going to the place of prayer. We were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. And she earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. The literal translation into English is, it happened now, going of us to the place of prayer, a girl certain having a gift, having a spirit of Python met us, who gained much from was bringing the masters of her by fortune telling. In other words, this woman is what we call what has been known in the culture as a Pythia. Who are they? In the city of Delphi, this is a picture I took of the remains of the temple of Apollo, was the oracle. And a Pythia was the female fortune tellers that at the oracle at Delphi. You see, if you were a king and you wanted to know, if I go into battle with this guy, am I going to win? You went to the oracle and you paid your money. It's a money spinner, quite frankly. But these are famous people. And Luke knows that this girl is a Pythia. What does that mean? He means he knows the cultural background. of what goes on. Although that's way south in Greece to go there. We'll come back to that in a minute. But going back, they then get dragged. The owners realized that their hope of making money was gone. They seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. And they brought them before the magistrates. Well, where's that? Well, here. This is the remains of what's called the bema. Now, a bema is, in Greek, a raised platform or a step. But in their culture, now you saw that earlier picture where the marketplace is over to the right of this. And you find that the crowd join in the assertions that these guys are doing wrong as far as the magistrates are called, because the law court is in public. And this is the remains of the bema. Yeah, you're going to see a more intact one shortly that's in Corinth and still there. But this is the remains of the platform where Paul and Silas would have been brought before the magistrates. Okay? But of course, it's all myth, isn't it? No. Now, from there, they come through Amphipolis and Apollonia, says chapter 17, verse 1, and they come to Thessalonica, where there's a Jewish synagogue. Can you see Apollonia's got a lake above it? That's a very big lake. It's called Lake Volvi. The modern motorway goes to the north of it. The old Via Ignatia goes to the south of it. You can still go and visit the village of Apollonia, and Amphipolis is an important archaeological site as well. You can go and visit that if you want to. Most of the rest of the Via Ignatia is not there. It's been ploughed up or whatever. But so they come to Thessalonica. Now, this is important. Now, Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. 2 years later, there's a battle on the plain of Philippi, two battles, one in the morning, and the first of them is not between Mark Antony and Octavian are on the were known as were part of the Julius Caesar camp, and Brutus and Cassius are part of the group that assassinated him, and effectively a civil war begins in Rome over this. And it's a very close run thing, but Mark Antony and Octavian, who later becomes Caesar Augustus, they win the battle. Now, I'm trying to find an ancient source that proves this, but many commentators will tell you about what happens. I'll come back to that in a minute. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue. Now, for those of you that are budding evangelists, in other words, he's looking for warm contacts, right? And he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I'm proclaiming to you is the Messiah, he said, and some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women. If you study the beginning of 1 Thessalonians, this is an incredible move of God, because Paul says, Paul, Silas and Timothy, who write Thessalonians, it's not just a Pauline letter. They said, brothers loved by God, we know that God has chosen you, elected you, because our gospel did not come to you in word only, logos only. Logos refers to the content of what's been spoken. But it came in power and in the Holy Spirit and in much conviction, even as you know what manner of men we were when we were among you, and you became imitators of us. I know Lloyd Jones has got a sermon on that. This is what Paul expects to happen. And this is what happens. This is an incredible move of God. And the opposition that starts reflects that. But the other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some characters, bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob and started a riot in the city. And they rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. But when they didn't find them, they dragged Jason and some of the believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over the world have come here." I like the version that says who have turned the world upside down. And Jason has welcomed them into his house, and they're all defying Caesar's decrees, saying that there is another king, one called Jesus. And there's a certain amount of truth in that, but of course we know that they weren't trying to just usurp the position of the Caesars. But notice in verse 6 and verse 8 this mention of the city officials. Now this masks something. It's a correct translation, but it masks something which is quite profound. What the text actually says is politarchus. Now the Greek word polis means city, and archo means ruler or official. So the translation is pretty faithful, but it masks the fact that this is a unique use of this word in the whole of the New Testament. And for 1800 years, the liberals used to say, oh, I don't know, Luke doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, look at this. There's a certain significance to the unique use of this term in that it indicates that Thessalonica had self-governing free city status within the Roman Empire. And Rome became an empire at the time of Caesar Augustus. You see, after the Battle of Philippi, Octavian and Mark Antony rewarded the city that had supported them and included Amphipolis and made them Roman free cities. That meant they had tax concessions, and they're also allowed to elect their own local government. Now that's what I want to try to confirm, but that's what you pick up if you look into this. And so when the Politarch inscription was discovered, how was it discovered? Well, there was a missionary. This was known about, and I've given a reference so you can get this document free from JSTOR. Peter will tell you what JSTOR is. Don't worry about that. It's quite fascinating reading. And this is in the British Museum down in room 78. Unfortunately, the room is not accessible to the public at the moment, but you can see its reference here. And it has the names of the Politarchs. Now, this is how it happened. It's a marble inscription set into the stone of the Varda Gateway located on the western end of the Via Ignatia, otherwise known as the Ignatian Way, or in Greek it's Ignatia Odos. And the road passes through Thessalonica, and it still does, and it's still called Ignatia. And the civil authorities decided to demolish the gateway in 1876 and use the stone to build a jetty for the harbour. And in 1877, the inscription was rescued by a guy called Peter Crosby, a local missionary, aided by John E. Blunt, who was the British consul. And it's when you go to see this in the British Museum, as I've done many times, it says presented by J. E. Blunt. And there's the reference for it. Now, this is what apparently, because there were no cameras, right? So this is apparently the sketch of what the gateway looked like. And if you could see it today, the Via Ignatia is a dual carriageway with lorries and buses on it. It'd never go through here. If this is a view of from Google Maps, and you can see the ancient wall here, and this is where the gate was. Now, this is where some of the new archaeological remains are as well. This is part of the new underground railway system in Thessalonica. But this is where it was, where the old Varda Gate was. But the inscription itself is now, as I say, in the museum. And it says this. The patriarchs, and they give the names, the politarchs are, and it gives all the names here. And these names are contemporary names that are used by Luke and Paul. And so if it's not an anachronism, you know, if you've got kids, you know that the fashions for choosing names changes, right? So these are contemporary names. Now, so what this is telling us is that Luke knows that Thessalonica is a Roman free city and is allowed to elect their own government. Well, so what? What difference does that make? Be patient and I'll show you. So this is why we think that they got this, that it was awarded by Octavian and Mark Antony as a result of them being supported before the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. And what I'm really trying to do is, it's all very well, I can look up Ben Witherington's commentary and he tells me this, and I'm saying, yes, but Ben, how do you know that? You know, I don't doubt him. I've met him. He's a godly man. But how do you know that? And I'd like to find an ancient source. Now, after Thessalonica, Paul eventually comes down to Corinth. I know that he comes Berea and so on. I don't propose to go there. If you go to Berea, you'll find sections of ancient Roman road and stuff from the time. But you won't find anything quite as remarkable as the Polytarch inscription. Now, eventually, you get down to Corinth. Now, this is very, very important. Now, you read this. So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God. And while Gallio was the proconsul of Achaia, Achaia is the region, and Corinth is the capital city of that region. It's a Roman area. The Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment, says the NIV. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you another little thing. You can check this up in your own time. Have you heard of an application for your phone or your laptop called Bible Hub? You go on Bible Hub and go into the interlinear and read this verse, 18:12, and you'll see precisely what I mean. It's well worth you doing this. So just look on Bible Hub, put the verse into Bible Hub, but particularly select the interlinear. Now, if you load the app onto your mobile phone, as soon as you load the app, you'll get a choice of 6 things to do, and one of them will be go to the interlinear. If you go onto it in your laptop, you've got to go fairly well up the page, and it will just say interlin. You click on that after putting the verse in, and instead of giving you about 20 translations in English, it will give you the Greek and the English interlinearly. And now watch this. So notice, first of all, the place of judgment. What Luke says, they led him to the bema. So if you're writing the place of judgment, clearly that's not a translation, is it? It's an interpretation. It's a correct one, because if you know the culture, you know that the bema, because you've already seen it at Philippi, is a place of legal judgment. This is where Paul met Gallio, the proconsul. It's still there, right? And on the front of it, there's a little inscription in English and in Greek. So for those of you that don't read Greek, it's beta. Now, that funny thing that looks like an N with a tail is eta. Greek has 7 vowels. It has a short E called epsilon, E sound. It has a long E called eta, right? Same with O. It has a short O called omicron. It has a long O called omicron, okay? So, not omicron, sorry. Omega, beg your pardon. Now, here's my wife standing here. So you can get an idea. You can get an idea of how tall it is, okay? So this is the place, this actually is the place that Paul was brought to. Now, Google Street View has been here. If you go and look at ancient Corinth and you put it into Google Maps, go to Street View, you'll find there's a little dot, a little blue dot. You can plonk your mouse there, and you can then have a 360-degree view of what it looks like to stand where Paul did. And so that's the next thing, but that's not all. Because I'm saying this is another example of eyewitness detail, but we haven't got there. In other words, Luke is saying this is the bema is still there. Luke is right, the evidence still there, right? But look at this. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. What Luke knows is that Corinth is governed by a proconsul, which means it's not a Roman free city. It's a Roman city, but it has a proconsul. But what he also knows is that Thessalonica is a Roman free city and it's governed by self-elected government. You see? Now, I'm not being academically clever. It's obvious to you, isn't it? But it's not obvious. And what I'm saying is that is evidence of somebody that knows the difference. It's not now geography, it's also politics. Anybody lost? Are you with me? You got what I'm saying? Right. Now, that's not the only thing that he knows. Because the other thing is, well, you know, this is what I've just said, and this is in the notes. And I can just send this to you as a PDF so that you can have it for your, you know, to consolidate this afterwards, okay? Now, he also knows that Gallio is the proconsul of Achaia. Well, so what? Have you ever heard of him before? He was the half-brother of Seneca, the philosopher. Did you know that? Who was the mentor to the young Nero. Now, Delphi, we've already heard, is part of the Roman province of Achaia. So Corinth is down at the bottom. The other side of the Gulf of Corinth is where Delphi is. And what's at Delphi? Well, there's the oracle. But what they found at Delphi is this. This is in the Archaeological Museum in Delphi. It's right in the entrance hall. Who does it refer to? Gallio, right? This is what it says. Now, this is I've set this against the background of the Temple of Apollo. Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, in the 12th year of tribunation power, acclaimed emperor for the 26th time, sends greetings. So this is dated in terms of his reign. For long I have been well disposed to the city of Delphi and solicitous for its prosperity, and have always observed the cult of the Pythian Apollo. Right, the fortune telling. And he says this. Now, since it is said to be destitute of citizens, as my friend and proconsul Lucius Junius Gallio recently reported to me, who's he? He's the guy that Paul met as the proconsul of Achaia on the beamer at Corinth, right? Now, we know that this guy only served half of his term because of illness. So because this is dated, we know within 18 months when Paul was in Corinth, right? Desiring Delphi should regain its former splendor. In other words, I want the oracle to start earning money again. I command you to invite well-born people also from other cities to come to Delphi as new inhabitants. And again, this is the Temple of Apollo, where the Pythia were, where the oracle was. So you turned up, you paid your money to one of the priests, and he went to the Pythia, who's a respectable lady otherwise at the back. And there are mixed stories about it. Some of them say there was a hole where fumes came up from the earth. In other words, she was stoned. And other people say, no, it's not like that at all. We don't know. But the point I'm making is that we have this evidence. So you have the Politarch inscription saying that Luke is telling you that Luke knows it's a free city. You have the proconsul and the beamer at Corinth, and so we know that that's not a free city. And now we know that Gallio is a real person, and that he you know, we know when Paul, do you begin to get the picture that this is not written down hundreds of years after the event, because this sort of detail just gets lost, right? Now, this doesn't prove everything. It's providing evidence, because you would expect of an early, not late, the accurate use of local knowledge, accurate use of knowledge of background culture. The Pythia, the local knowledge, you've now seen where Seleucia is, all these other places are. The geography's right. The knowledge of people, the knowledge of place names, the knowledge of political detail, they're verifiable historical facts. Now, there's loads of stuff that people are still finding out all the time. I talked about this once at an evangelical church down in the south, And some guy at the back said, yeah, but we don't know for sure. We got the problem of Jesus' birth in Luke, and we do have problems with it, don't we? Because you've got the when there is the famine and all the rest of it, and there's a problem with dating with that, and we say, well, yes, I understand that, but archaeology is discovering stuff all the time, and eventually, I'm sure, we're going to find that those things get clarified. But that's set against weight of evidence like this. And so, you know, I think that it's important. Now, I've spelt Lee Strobel wrong down there, but I've got it right up there. I've got to amend this. But he makes this point. The consensus among contemporary scholars is that Luke, historian and theologian, is indeed a careful and reliable recorder of history. And in fact, over the years, some scholars have asserted that Luke was mistaken about certain historical facts, only to be proven wrong by further archaeological findings. So that's as far as I want to go tonight. I just wanted you to get a flavour of the sort of background that shows you that what Luke says is pretty credible when you go and you see this stuff for yourself. Okay, so thanks for listening.